Hello, and welcome to Horrific Tales. In this show, we celebrate the creations of independent authors and aspiring writers. Please like, subscribe, and share these episodes so that we can help our talented friends get as much exposure as possible. We would also appreciate it if you could support our artists by following them on their individual platforms and by purchasing their works. Details on how to do so are in the episode description. Today's horrific tale is a published piece submitted to us by the wonderful Eric Kapitan. Come join us now as we present to you an excerpt from A Love Not Deceased. Number 1. Daddy. Maggie woke from her slumber as the sound of her alarm pounded into her eardrums. Before that silly alarm had awoken her, Maggie had been in the middle of a cool dream. She'd had it many times before, but she still enjoyed it nonetheless. She was outside, the weather beautiful, the bright blue sky clashing wonderfully with the vibrant green grass. The air smelt sweet. Perfection. In school, Maggie heard that dreams were usually in black and white. Not hers. She saw every color and detail. The temperature was warm, but not unbearable. Just like it was at the campsite her mother and father used to take her to before things got bad. Before Maggie's mother got sick. The dream would start out with Maggie hearing splashing. She was at a public pool, standing atop a diving board. She looked down at the clear water as the sun reflected off of it, creating little sparkles. People below swam in its cool and welcoming liquid. Maggie wore her favorite swimsuit. A purple bikini with small blue polka dots. Her toenails were painted to match. Feeling her smooth blonde hair on her shoulders, she bit her lip, looking down in anticipation and fear. She was about to climb down the ladder when she saw her mother standing in the center of the pool, looking up at her and smiling. She was yelling and waving her hands in the air, motioning for her to come down. It was then time seemed to stop and everyone in the pool vanished. It was just Maggie alone with her mother. Maggie closed her eyes tight and held her breath. Without prompting, she felt her tiny feet lift off the board. She opened her eyes for a split second, watching the water rush toward her, before closing them again. As she felt the slap of the water on her feet, the sound of the alarm clock ripped her from the water's cool embrace. It was Daddy's idea to set the alarm clock to go off every 3 hours. It was a way to remind her to get up and use the bathroom to prevent her from peeing the bed. Daddy was getting tired of having to wash and change the sheets every night, and Maggie was tired of waking up in her own urine. Maggie silenced the alarm and continued laying in the bed for a few moments with her eyes closed, before finally plopping her feet down on the carpeted floor. She was wearing her favorite pink nightgown that had been a present from her mother. It was covered in purple and blue unicorns. Her toes felt cold as she walked across the room, heading to the bathroom. After she did her business and washed her hands, she tiptoed down the hallway toward the kitchen, hoping Daddy had gone to bed so she could sneak a glass of milk and a chocolate chip cookie. As she neared the living room, she saw the flickering glow of the television. Shoot! Maggie initially considered turning back, but hunger compelled her to keep pushing forward and continue her quest to fill her belly. As she walked further into the living room, she saw her father sitting in his favorite chair, wearing the same blue-striped pajama pants he always wore. He'd put them on first thing when he got home from work, and on the weekends, he would wear them non-stop. Maggie continued to creep forward. When she reached the front of him, she saw his eyes were closed and his mouth open slightly. The white haze of the television caused the spittle in the corner of his mouth to twinkle. Maggie smiled, finding his pathetic display adorable. After finishing her milk and cookie, Maggie washed her glass, careful not to make too much noise. As she began to tiptoe past her father, she took another look at him and began to sense that something wasn't right. For one thing, whenever her father was sound asleep, he would usually be filling the room with his loud snoring. She remembered one specific family trip where her mother recorded it one night and played it for him in the morning. They'd all had a big laugh over breakfast. Mom and Maggie, that was. Daddy hadn't found it very funny, though. Upon closer inspection, Maggie also noticed his skin did not look right. It was pale, and there was not the usual warm color in his cheeks. She'd always thought that with his rosy cheeks and white beard that he looked like Santa Claus, She placed her tiny hand on one of his hairy arms and gently shook him. "Daddy?" No response. She noticed the nearly full beer that sat on the TV tray next to her father's grayish chair. She picked up the bottle and looked at the label. Bulldog Red, American Lager. The bottle read in bold red text. Behind the text was a face of a red bulldog growling, revealing its sharp white teeth. Maggie put the bottle to her lips, taking a tiny sip. She almost threw up as her face screwed up in revolt. Spitting the foul liquid back in the bottle, she stuck her tongue out in the air, trying to get rid of the awful taste. She put the bottle down and brought her attention back to her father. Maggie put her hand on his shoulder this time and shook him a little harder. "Daddy, wake up!" She looked at the TV and saw that some old black and white movie was playing as she put both her hands on her father and shook him even harder, raising her voice higher. "Daddy, stop being silly! You fell asleep in front of the idiot again," Maggie said playfully as a tiny giggle escaped her lips. Her little fingernails dug into his shoulder as she continued to shake him, causing his head to slouch forward like that of a rag doll. "Daddy?" Maggie put both hands on his cheeks and lifted his head up against the back of the chair. His skin felt cold and clammy beneath her tiny fingers. She put her hand in front of his mouth and felt no breath. She then put her head against his chest, resting her ear up against him like you would with a seashell as you try to hear the ocean. Maggie's face turned red as tears began to stream down her face, the reality of what was happening finally sinking in. "Daddy, no!" Maggie screamed. "You can't leave me like Mommy did." Maggie climbed into his lap, cuddling up against his big stomach, resting her head against her father's dead and bloated body. "I won't let you leave me," Maggie whispered as she wrapped her little arms around the back of his neck. She laid with him for 4 hours before someone finally found her. 2. Giving up. The door burst open with rage, and there he stood. His long brown hair flowed over his shoulders, strands of it hanging over his bright, fierce blue eyes that burned a hole in her as her heart pounded. He wore tight black jeans that left little to the imagination, and a white button-up shirt that was open, revealing his chiseled chest and lightly tanned skin. He smirked at her as he rushed into the room without hesitation, and she arose from her bed, placing both hands on his bare chest. He gravitated into her, enclosing her tiny waist in his muscled arms. She gently dug her red-painted nails into the soft yet masculine skin on his chest as she kissed him as hard as she could on the mouth. He gently began to pull up her nightgown as he laid her on the bed. Maggie lost her train of thought and her fingers stopped typing on the keyboard. She watched the cursor flash almost hypnotically in front of the word bed. Well, that's a good start. I gotta get ready anyway. Maggie itched her bare leg as she took a sip of her coffee. Her cup was black with red bold text that read, "Without my coffee, I'll murder your firstborn." It was a cup that had once belonged to her father. He'd always had a strange sense of humor. As she sat the coffee cup down, Basil jumped into her lap, startling her. "You silly little boy," Maggie said to the ragdoll cat as she rubbed the top of his head and then moved down his chin, scratching soft, long white fur gently. Basil purred loudly in approval. "Sorry, kitty. Mama's got a date today. Gotta get ready." Maggie looked at the clock and realized just how late it was. She gently pushed Basil off her lap and hurried out of her computer room, which doubled as her bedroom, and went into the bathroom. Staying in her pajamas way past noon was a normal routine for Maggie. She was a self-published romance and erotica writer. Quite successful, too. It was enough to help pay some of the bills anyway, with help from her decent-sized fan base, which consisted mostly of lonely and horny soccer moms. Since she wasn't exactly making millions of dollars, Maggie continued to work at the same job she had before her books took off. She worked for a call center that took orders for an online store called Forbidden Fruit, a sex shop that sold a variety of toys, movies, lubes, you name it. Maggie had inquired multiple times about having her books sold through them, but corporate offices kept giving her the runaround. She guessed they didn't think people read to get off anymore. She often worked there during weird hours, and since it was a 24-hour line, she worked most weekends and holidays as well. Between that, her writing, and everyday life, it left her little time for dating. It had been 7 years since Maggie's last relationship. Albert was 2 years older than her, and he was the man she thought she would marry. Unfortunately, Albert had been cheating on her for several months during their 3-year relationship. She ended it quickly after finding out, even though he begged her not to, claiming he would change. Like her Aunt Mary once told her, once a cheater, always a cheater. After that, Maggie just gave up on the idea of relationships. There were many men, boys over the years who pushed for her attention, but she never gave them the time of day. Not because they were ugly or boring, she just did not want to go through the hurt again. The loneliness began to sink in over time. Maggie grew tired of sleeping alone. Grew tired of not having a warm body by her side that she could snuggle up to during cold winter nights. She missed having someone to sit on the couch and watch movies with. Maggie hadn't felt this lonely since the death of her mother. She died of brain cancer when Maggie was just 8 years old. She remembered when she heard the news. Her aunt took her and her cousins out to a movie and for pizza after. It was a really good time, and it had been the most fun Maggie had had for a while. Maggie walked through the front door with a giant teddy bear she had got from the tickets she'd won playing the basketball game at the arcade next to the pizza shop. It was bright blue, her mother's favorite color, and she intended to give it to her. Her smile gently faded, as did the color in her face, when she saw her father standing there, waiting for her with tears rolling down his chubby cheeks. She had never seen her father cry before, knew her mother was ill, and so the reason for it hit her immediately. Her father held her tight as they cried together. This was the first time her father had ever really hugged her. He was usually a man who had trouble displaying affection. Being an only child, it was just her and father from then on. Her parents had wanted to have more children, but decided against it when they first discovered Maggie's mother was sick. The first few months were difficult. It had always been Maggie's mother taking care of them. But now, her father had to step up, and she had to learn to mature at a much faster rate. A year after her mother's death, Maggie's 3rd grade class was going to take a trip to an aquarium in Boston. Maggie was delighted and really looking forward to it. Before she discovered she wanted to be a writer, Maggie thought about studying sea life. Much to Maggie's disappointment, her father didn't allow her to go. "Please, Daddy, please, I really want to go," she begged as she put on the biggest puppy dog eyes she could. "No, Maggie, I'm sorry. It's just too far away. Boston is a big place." "But we will have our teacher. Come on, Daddy, please let me go." "I said no, Maggie," he responded with a tone of aggravation. "Perhaps next year I can take you there. We can make a trip out of it." He smiled, trying to placate her. "That's what you said last year about Six Flags, but we never went. You always say we're going to do things, but we never do them." Her voice turned shaky as she held back tears. "Maggie, that is enough. You are not going. End of story." "I wish Mommy was still here. She would not be a jerk like you are." Her father instantly slapped her across the cheek. There was a silence between them for a shocked second before Maggie began to cry. He put his arms around her, immediately regretting what he had done. After that day they grew closer, and, as promised, he took her to both Six Flags and the aquarium the following year. His death was something Maggie never got over. She could still remember every detail of finding her father sitting in his favorite chair. She'd held on to him for as long and as tight as she could. He was her daddy, and she was not ready to lose him. It was her aunt who had discovered her. She was worried when she tried calling on the phone and got no answer. She let herself in using the spare key and discovered little Maggie cradling her dead father. It took her aunt 30 minutes to pry her little hands from her father's corpse. Maggie feared abandonment. She despised the thought of it. It felt like everyone she loved had left her. Her mom, her dad, Albert. Well, she was the one who technically left Albert, but he was the asshole who cheated on her. Because of this, Maggie initially decided it was best to shut herself off from love. The difficult part was that she desired love. So, despite her reservations, she dusted herself off and put herself back out there.
Well, we hope that you enjoyed our latest horrific tale. If you want to keep up to date with future episodes, then subscribe to our YouTube channel and like our Facebook page. Please also take a moment to support our contributing artists who very kindly lend their talents to this show. Check out the links in the description as to how you can do this. Until next time, my friends, keep it creepy, keep it horrific.